Will be the first of 3 talks. We're going to have a look at agile and lean development methodologies that I suppose form the mainstay of how software is developed today. First talk of the 3, probably reasonably long, because we want to spend a little bit of time identifying and then considering the principles that underpin agile and lean approaches. And I suppose by way of starting off in this, we'll have a look at Waterfall in terms of giving us a baseline. Waterfall, you'll be aware, it's the classic software development approach. It's the one that we're probably all familiar with, that most people, when they're learning about software engineering, they'll learn that you have the Waterfall technique. And for many years, it was what people used. But it has fallen out of favour for good reason. And we want to understand some of the deficiencies, the limitations of the waterfall model, because this will help them better understand the context whereby agile and lean development techniques came out of. And you can see from the slide here, we've got waterfall model being overly optimistic. And if you, my point of view, if you did want to summarize the main deficiency with the waterfall model, it is that it is overly optimistic in a number of the assumptions that it makes. You can see here the actual waterfall model as it is defined, and to a certain extent it's appealing, it makes sense. You start off with a planning phase, you gather your requirements, you work out, well, what exactly does the user want? You develop a design for that. You say, okay, if I do this and do that and create things this way, I'll be able to meet those requirements. You implement it, you create software for doing so, and you test it and you make sure that you're happy that the software does indeed meet the requirements. And you then finally go to the user and you say, look, we've done all the hard work, we've met your requirements, there you go. And ultimately you deploy it to the customer's site. Fair enough. It's logical, it's sensible, it breaks it down into what seems to be a good series of sequential steps. However, what underpins this? So there's a number of assumptions, but I want to highlight 3 of them here that can become problematic. It's not to say they always are problematic, but there's a reasonable probability that they may become problematic. So the waterfall model assumes that users can accurately and precisely define what they require upfront before they see or use the product. So if you or I, if we have an idea for, let's say it's your university course, you want a project management tool, something that will help you work with your fellow team members in terms of coordinating activities and tasks. And you were getting somebody to develop that piece of software. The waterfall model assumes that you can precisely, at very, very low detail, define exactly what it is you want. It's not that you just have a nice big idea and a bit of a feeling for how it works, but you understand precisely how it should work at the lowest or nearly the lowest level of detail. Waterfall model, it also assumes that the business environment is stable and will not significantly change during the project. So software takes time to create. It could be a 3-month project, a 6-month project. Some of the larger ones you can take 2, 3, 4 years to develop the overall system. But Waterfall assumes that, so if I'm doing a large project and I want a piece of software that's going to take 2 years out, that I know in 2 years' time that this is the environment, the world into which the software system will be introduced, that it's going to be roughly predictable. I can say what it's going to be like. Third one is that the requirements can be documented in a manner that is consistently and unambiguously understood by the developers. So this subtle point, so it's not only that you, for example, let's say the project management example, that you know exactly at a low level of detail how you want your project management system done, but you can also communicate that to me if I was the developer. And you can do it in a way that I will precisely and exactly understand what you mean. I will not have a slightly different view of it. I will not get confused. It will be precise communication. So there are 3 assumptions that are inherent within this particular model. And indeed, the assumptions are perfectly legitimate and really they do apply to to any type of software development. Ultimately, the client needs to be able to say if this is what they want. There are assumptions that, okay, this is what the world's going to be. There's not going to be radical change, and communication has to occur. Now, where we have problems is where you are trying to create something sizable. And sizable in this case doesn't actually mean massive. Anything other than a small, trivial problem probably falls into this category. So when the delivery date's years away, or months, or whatever, just a long time, typically that means then that you're dealing with a fairly large piece of software that needs to be developed. And this is where all three of those assumptions then start falling down. So if I'm developing a large piece of software, it's unlikely that the client is going to be able to see the totality of that software and to know exactly what they want in every single situation or every single combination of whatever it is based on the project. Because it's large and it's going to take a period of time, there's more probability that the world will change, that you'll take on a new type of project which will have slightly different functionality. And the larger the project, then the more risky it is that when you're trying to communicate it to me, there'll be bits that I don't understand. So big projects, the waterfall model introduces very significant likelihoods that those three assumptions will fall down, that they will not be met. So Mr. Perfect, if you want, that's a way of characterizing the waterfall model. It appeals to some managers. It seems to be nicely compartmentalized, it's logical. It will produce in a well-detailed plan where, as long as you stick to that plan, you will create the software that meets the requirements within the timescales that are defined, and surely everything will be okay. So at a certain point, waterfall then, it does come across as the Mr. Perfect. In a perfect world, this would work. The problem is that with medium to large size projects, we don't live in a perfect world, that the client is unlikely to be able to define things precisely, that some things will probably change and the process of communication will become more difficult. So the reality in terms of the types of environment within which software is created, it is messy. That idealistic, if only the world was like this and we adhered to the plan, doesn't hold. And that means then as a consequence that a lot of waterfall models, they overshoot their budget immensely, or you eventually end up with software that isn't fit for purpose, it is never used. And there's examples of multi-million pound, getting into billion pound items of software that were created that were massively well over budget and ultimately didn't end up providing any useful software at the end. So waterfall has a number of limitations. See this there, a better approach is to use a method that is designed to be flexible and adaptable to uncertain user requirements. And this is where agile approaches come in. They are ones that do not resist change, they embrace change, they go with it. So agile approaches, they tackle uncertainty by delivering working software to the client. So working software, things that works, that can be run, that can be tested, that can be used, and you're delivering it to the client, so far so good, on a frequent and regular basis. That's the key bit. So we're not waiting 2 years before going back to the user. Rather, after 2 weeks, we're going to the user and saying, okay, well, here's a small bit of what you wanted me to do. Have a look at it. Tell me if that's what you want. And what this means is that if there's been an issue, either in terms of the user's understanding of what they wanted or their ability to communicate it to us, some of the assumptions have broken down. 2 weeks in, if the user looks at it and goes, no, that's not what I wanted, then, okay, in the worst case, we've lost 2 weeks of development effort, as opposed to finding this out 2 years into it when it's too late. It gives the user an opportunity then to say, actually, this is what I meant, or can you change it this way or tweak it that way? Equally, if things change during it, the user can say, okay, on some of the previous iterations you've done this, can you tweak it or change it because my environment has moved on, has changed itself. So it's frequent, regular, updates of working software, things that the user can use, can try out, can explore, can see if this is what I want, does it do what I need it to do? And we repeat that process. The Agile bit comes in that because if there are changes or if we don't get it right, then we adapt and we integrate and bring those changes into it so that we evolve the software throughout the whole process. So the Agile Manifesto is, well, it's a manifesto. It sets out what Agile is all about, and it provides a nice summary of Agile techniques. I'm going to have a look at that. Actually, it was put together about 2001 by a group of software experts, so obviously people we can trust. Prior to this, you sort of lived in a world where you didn't really have Agile, so it was traditionally Waterfall, but there was a lot of people using Waterfall that was realizing, hold on, it doesn't work in a lot of cases, and they were coming up with their own improved techniques that did work. And over time, people sort of realized, well, you're doing yours this way, and I'm doing mine this way, and it's kind of similar, and the notion of an Agile approach emerged from it. So in 2001, you had a bunch of these people get together and say, look, we're all doing something similar, let's define what it is, and the Agile Manifesto emerged. So it says that we are uncovering better ways of developing software, so now it's fairly accepted, by doing it and helping others do it. So through this work, so this is the work they've been doing, they have come to value individual and interactions over processes and tools. So individuals, working with people, interacting with people, that's important. And they're saying there that it is more important to do that than it is in terms of the types of tools or the processes that you follow. Working software over comprehensive documentation. That if you have a choice between going to your client and saying, here, have a lovely document, or saying, here, have some software that works, you should favor giving your client working software because they can use it, they can try it out, they can give you feedback, as opposed to a nice document which they'll read and maybe not do much else beyond that. Customer collaboration over contract and negotiation. So here they're saying that it is better to collaborate with your customers, to work with them, as opposed to sit down and define a contract that then beholds both sides in terms of sticking precisely to it. Responding to change over following a plan. That if something does change, as opposed to resisting it, which Waterfall implicitly does, you got a plan, you stick to your plan. Agile techniques say that it's better to respond, to go with that change, to consider it and ask, does it make sense? And if it does, then go with it. So the bit at the bottom is important. That is, while there are value in the items on the right, so the processes, the comprehensive documentation, the contracts, the following a plan, they're all useful things. Agile approaches say there is more value to the items on the left in terms of working with individuals, producing working software, in terms of collaborating and responding to change. Alongside the manifesto, we got an Agile declaration of interdependency. So these are how things link together. And a number of these are quite important principles that we want to highlight and to have a look at. A lot of the wording here, we'll get onto the wording and how they word it in a little bit, but I'll read them out as they are stated in the Declaration of Interdependency, and then we'll say a little bit about them. So we increase return on investment by making continuous flow of value or focus. So return on investment, basically what you get out of it, your return. So continuous flow of value. Now, value is things that the client values, working software, stuff that meets whatever they want the software to do. And continuous means that if you are going to the customer frequently, every 2 weeks, for example, and saying to the customer, here, have a piece of functionality that you wanted me to develop, that's a process and an activity that the client will value. They will like to see this developing. They will like to understand and have an input into that process. We deliver reliable results by engaging customers in frequent interactions and shared ownership. So again, if you contrast this with the waterfall model, where quite often you're only involving the client at the start and the very end, here in Agile approaches, you involve the client as much as you can. You get them to be an active participant within the process. So engaging customers in frequent interactions and shared ownership, that it almost should be an obvious thing, that it's their project as well. So give them an input and a say in how the thing evolves and get their views and factor that into the development. We expect uncertainty and manage for it through iterations, anticipation and adaptation. So Agile is set up to say that things probably will change. In fact, if they don't change, then that's unexpected. So in this case, they are expecting that the best plans probably will end up being changed in some way. We say here they manage it is by doing things in small chunks and iterations. Anticipation and adaptation means that you go with changes where they make sense. I'll read this out. We unleash creativity and innovation, surely a good thing to unleash, by recognizing that individuals are the ultimate source of value. Again, the value word. And creating an environment where they can make a difference. Stated in everyday English, basically it's saying that the most valuable asset you have within your company are your employees, your software engineers. These are the people that will come up with the good ideas that will produce the good quality software. And if you want to make best use of them, you should have an environment that encourages them to be creative, that gives them the freedom to explore the ideas that they have, that doesn't artificially or necessarily constrain them. This is all about creating a good environment that really values your programmers and lets them, if you like, operate to the best of their ability. We boost performance through group accountability for results and shared responsibility for team effectiveness. In other words, when things go well or when things don't go well, and whose job it is to be responsible. In Agile approaches, it is the whole team. So if the team, if the project is a success, it is because the whole team delivered that. They were responsible, the whole team was responsible, took an interest in doing it to high quality, and it's really to the benefit and the credit of the whole team if they do well. Equally, if it doesn't work, then again, it's the whole team that is responsible. So this is all about shared accountability, shared ownership. We improve effectiveness and reliability through situationally specific strategies, processes, and practices. Again, what does that mean? In essence, what it's saying here is that you might define an agile process. For example, Scrum would be one common approach. And Scrum will have a set of processes and things that you go through. But in this case here, we improve effectiveness and reliability. If you're looking at some defined process and you think, okay, well, I've been taught and told I should do this, but for us, if we did something slightly different, it's probably going to be better. Then go with something that's slightly different. So it's all about adapting and changing your processes so that they work to best effect. Not slavishly following a plan because the plan's there, but going with what is likely to return best overall impact, output, value, whatever way you want to characterize it. So that's all we want to say about Agile. There's quite a few principles there. We'll move on to Lean as the next component. I should say here that Agile and Lean, that they're complementary. That there are a number of aspects that overlap, but they do relate to different aspects that are quite complementary. So here specifically, we want to look at what you might characterize as Lean development. So it says here, the roots of Agile approaches are in Lean development, which really, again, is getting at both of these things go together. Lean manufacturing has been about for rather a long time. So it is a manufacturing process, not specific to developing software. It predates that by many decades. And the company that made it famous initially was Toyota. For the Toyota production system, which was the system they had in place for creating cars. And Toyota was famous for being able to produce high volumes of high quality cars that didn't have defects, that were engineered and manufactured to a very high standard. And it was due to the TPS, that their production system they used, which was based on lean manufacturing principles. So lean is a systematic approach. Now that's important. When you say something's a systematic approach, it means that you're not sort of just doing it randomly, but you have an approach, a system in place that will try to accomplish. What does it try to accomplish? It tries to identify and eliminate waste. So lean is set up to get rid of waste. We get to define what waste is. We'll do that in the next few slides. But waste is wasteful. It's things we don't want, don't need. How does it do it? By continuously improving processes. Alongside this, lean focuses on maximizing value. Again, that value word to the customer. So lean approaches are all about identifying what is really, really important to your client. And then everything that isn't, if it's wasteful, ruthlessly getting rid of it. That's a lean approach. It's underpinned by a number of principles. You can see them here. We'll go through in the next few slides. We'll look at a few of the aspects. So lean's all about defining value, about mapping a value stream, and again we'll get on some of the wording in a little bit, about creating a flow, about establishing pull, and pull actually is, again I'll talk about this at the end, it's one of the more important aspects about, you've pull systems and you've push systems. A push system is where if I have a job and people come along to me and they say, here's some work for you, and they push that system, they give that work to me, that's a push system. Effectively, I can accumulate a lot of work. A pull system is one where I decide, okay, I'm going to go and take some work and do it. And has quite important implications in terms of how best people work. And the fifth one then is the pursuit of perfection. Well, why not? These are the principles that underpin it. That there's a lot of deep thinking behind them, but in essence, we want to tease out two aspects. The first one is this notion of value. Now, it's cropped up throughout these slides, about the Agile slides. They talked about value. It keeps coming up. And the second one then about eliminating waste. And waste we can define as things which, generally speaking, are not valuable. So the first one about defining value. It is essential. It's probably the most important thing you do when creating software. So in the context of whatever project you're doing, ask what is going to provide maximum bang for your buck, maximum value. So things that add value are things that the client wants and would be willing to pay money for. So if you go to the client and they say, oh, that would be nice, would you be prepared to pay money for it? Not really. It's not valuable. So something that is value is stuff the client really, really wants and is prepared to actually put, if you like, money, resource, whatever, behind that to make it possible. Waste then are things that consume resources. So resources can be time, effort, money, anything. But if you're consuming resources, but you're doing things that are of no importance to the client. So if you go to the client and say, okay, well, we do this, it takes up X amount of time, and the client goes, I don't care, this has no relevance to me, that's wasteful. It's not providing value. So when we find value, we mean it from that point of view. And for creating our projects, we should try to go out of our way to get to maximize the value. So you should always spend your valuable and limited time, effort, resources on activities that offer value to the project, which is to the client. A little bit down at the bottom, just on the side, there are some non-value added items. Now, these could be regulatory requirements, it could be legal requirements that you must do, but they're not necessarily things that the client is that fussed about. It's just the regulatory framework within which you work. So that's a must. But all of the other things either are adding value or they are wasteful and should be removed. If you think about the project you're doing as part of this module, in our case, things that add value, effectively you can interpret this as value in terms of your project that will give you marks. So if you're going to sit down and you're going to say, right, I'm going to spend 3 hours this afternoon working on my project, you should be sitting thinking, what am I going to do in those 3 hours? And what value will be added based on what I accomplish? Now that means that you look quite closely at the marking scheme. Ultimately here you've got a finite amount of time and effort that you can spend. You want to maximize the mark that you will get on your project. So value added for you is maximizing your mark. So you want to look at the marking scheme. You want to say, right, well, there's marks for complex algorithms. There's marks for doing a good design. There's marks for making it extensible and all of the other things that marks are available for. And you should then make sure that you spend your 3 hours doing things that demonstrate extensibility, reuse, good design, complex algorithms, all of those different things. Because you can be sure then at the end of that 3-hour period, you have something that will be of value to you, value to your project. It will give you marks. If you find at the end of the 3 hours and you ask, what have I done? What have I contributed? And you can't come up with much in terms of the marking scheme, then that's really has been sort of a wasteful 3 hours in terms of how much it has benefited and added value to your project. The other aspect of lean approaches then is that once you've defined what is valuable to the client, anything that isn't, and it's not regulatory, is waste, and we want to get rid of it. And there's different lean approaches, different ways they can do it, but effectively you basically want to then engineer out, remove any of those wasteful aspects. And you can see a list of them here. So things like defects is a form of waste. So if something is engineered and it doesn't work, well, you're either going to have to discard it, redo it again, you're wasting time. Overproduction is another one. So if you create a lot of stuff, more than you need, then you're going to have to store that stuff somewhere. You're going to have to process it, inventory it. And actually, again, it takes time and effort and money to do this. So again, that's also a form of waste. Waiting, non-utilization of talent, similar things. If you have people twiddling their thumbs, not using them, not maximizing value. And again, you can read the other ones there. You can sort of see that a lot of these are manufacturing terms, but the principles, though, do apply and map across onto software engineering, software development. So again, in context of this project, you should get into the habit of viewing how you spend your time and how much of your time was spent adding value, giving you marks. Okay, so rather bold slide here. Let's cut the bill. A lot of the earlier slides when we were talking about Agile, we were talking about Lean, used a lot of management talk. They talked about mapping the value chain, empowering the team, and lots of other stuff that to be honest, it would be very easy just to shrug one's shoulders, roll one's eye and goes, it's just management rubbish. Please don't jump to that conclusion, even though I despair when I see that type of language being used. Agile and Lean approaches have transformed how software is developed. They have an extremely good track record in terms of being able to demonstrate success, projects that deliver software that the client thinks, this is exactly what I want, doing it on budget and time, all of those other things. And if you compare it to the Waterfall model, what was used before, there you had an approach that looked great on paper, and it would be great in an ideal world, but it does not actually apply to how people work, or did not map onto the realities of how software is actually created. Agile and Lean approaches do. They're smart. They actually work with people. They take people into mind, that they're designed so that they enable us to work more effectively. So it comes into things like, for example, push and pull systems. A push system where you give people work, you run the risk of overloading people, of giving them multiple items. A pull system where you say to the person, look, do one item at a time. People can't multitask. And if you let one person focus on a task, go on to the next one, then go on to the next one, you're actually going to have a more optimal solution than you give them all at the same time, just keep pushing things on top of it. So Agile and Lean, even though the terminology is a little bit rubbishy, they genuinely do work with people. And that's important, and that's why they are valuable. So I wholeheartedly recommend looking a lot of the director reading, thinking about this, because there's a lot of deep stuff within this that fundamentally does work. By way of a little bit of an aside here, so embracing an Agile and a Lean philosophy will maximize the marks you receive in your university projects. I imagine, and sadly, most people listening to this talk, if you get as far as this point, well done. You'll go, okay, Agile and Lean is what they use when I get out of my year in industry or my job. If that's what I have to do, that's what I have to do. Well, that's fair enough. It's a bit disappointing if that's where you simply end it. If you actually are prepared to make an investment in time and effort and to think, okay, how can I approach my study in an Agile and a Lean way? Now, this project is an easy way to do it, or you can have other forms as well. But if you actually adopt this in your university modules, I say here you will maximize, but in as far as you can maximize, this is going to be probably the best way of maximizing the marks that you receive. So genuinely, I can't undersell it. It works. It's been shown to work. And the reality is that it will work for you on your project if you decide to put in the time and effort and actually treat it and use it seriously. But with takeaways, a few of them here. So traditional waterfall approach makes a number of assumptions that can often be unrealistic. We know that, certainly for large projects. Agile software approaches, they're designed to be flexible, designed to be adaptable. They embrace change, they don't try to resist it. Lean techniques, they're all about working out what is really, really valuable, what makes the difference. And anything that doesn't make a difference, get rid of it, ruthlessly so. And both of these approaches complement one another. So if you did want to do a little bit more direct reading, encourage it. I would recommend going and get, say, a book on Kanban. Kanban is a good Agile Lean development technique that ties together a lot of these principles. It's quite broadly used within software development. So that's a nice one to start with and to explore that a little bit further. Now, brings to the end this rather long talk, but hopefully useful enough by way of defining some of these underlying principles. The next talk, we're going to have a look at Scrum as one more agile than Lean, but one sort of common development methodology. And the third talk then, we'll tease out some of the principles that we want to focus on within the project in this particular module.